Hey everybody, today I am going to be reviewing Shutter Island. This film came out in 2010. It was directed by Martin Scorsese. I know this is a very random review, and many of my reviews tend to be, but yeah, I know I reviewed this at the time it came out. Don't even remember that review, but I revisited this film the other day randomly, and I don't know, this film kind of sticks out to me a bit when I think about Scorsese's body of work, mainly because as far as the subject matter goes, it's one that I love, and yet it doesn't meet my expectations, so I find that to be very frustrating. I struggle a lot with Scorsese films post Goodfellas, and I've talked about that a lot on this channel, but particularly in the 2000s, the mid-2000s. But this tends to be maybe in the bottom 5 movies for Martin Scorsese, at least that I can think of at the top of my head. Of course, there are movies like Gangs of New York and Hugo to consider as well. But Shutter Island just, it's an overwrought film. It's one of those things that feels like it's overworking constantly with very simplified type of elements. And it kind of drives a lot of the meaning of the piece into the ground. Because it is Scorsese, it is very boastful and very much part of the postmodern experience. It has that sense of self-importance, and the archetypes themselves, I would say, are quite broad within the film. But I don't think it ever really finds a true presence and an emotional punch to kind of embody all of that broadness. I would say anything that feels interesting in the film feels stale almost instantly once it sits out for a little bit. And I think that, frankly, Scorsese is better than this material. But of course, it is, after all, Martin Scorsese. So it's not like this movie is without merit. It's not a bad film, I would say. But, you know, naturally, with Martin Scorsese, we have certain standards, I would say. He's very visual and has amazing attention to detail and, of course, expert craftsmanship. But I think that can only go so far within this particular type of movie. And for me, I just desired a lot more authenticity here and maybe a little bit less self-awareness. This is a film set in the 1950s. It's kind of a McCarthy era type of fable. It is about a Boston detective played by Leonardo DiCaprio. He also has a partner, and he is played by Mark Ruffalo. They are assigned a case on a remote island. It's very stormy and moody, and it is in an insane asylum for the criminally insane, no less. One of the patients there disappeared without a trace, so our detectives have to find her. Though our protagonist here has a lot of his own internal issues that he needs to confront throughout the search, because he is a very worn down ex-veteran of World War II. He has a lot of PTSD and just clear burdens that he's carrying that we don't know about yet. But there are naturally many references in the movie to World War II and concentration camps, that sort of thing. What initially intrigued me about the film, I would say, is that it takes place in an insane asylum, and yeah, it's one of those B-style horror movies that is pulling from the traditions of the 1940s and the 50s, which I think means a lot to Scorsese. But of course, it's combining that high art of Martin Scorsese, you know, academic influences and the expressionism that naturally goes into the film noir. And when it comes to psych wards, insane asylums, that sort of thing, I think they're great templates for very compelling psychological puzzles. Morality plays of sorts that allow you to examine things like, you know, like you're looking in a funhouse mirror, and the asylum is, in a way, kind of the funhouse mirror experience. That is, I think, on a basic level, but it can represent so many things. It represents hierarchical structure, reflection of, you know, society, as I said. It can reflect politics or history. And perhaps one of the scariest things, the idea of the mind being questioned, is, I think, a terrifying thing to humans. And when it's done well in a film, when you lose control of your mind like that, it can be very effective and chilling. And I also like the idea of the madness leaking into the narrative here in the same way that dreams leak into a lot of the formulas we have for movies. So it's like that meta perspective going on here that I find to be intriguing. Again, there's a lot to work with. It can be really fun to write. And there's always the idea that perhaps insanity can reveal more clarity, ironically. So is the character really insane here or not is, I think, a very interesting question. But it's the execution that bothers me, because there is a lot of lofty language, it feels like, in this movie, and yet it's not really saying very much. All of the symbols and like the hints of foreshadowing here are very paint by the numbers. And so many of the fantasy sequences, the surreal sequences, the scenes that build tension here or any emotion just feel more self-indulgent rather than serving the actual piece, serving the story. And the camp factor, I think, can be an interesting take on things, because there is just a hint of humor there naturally. And when it comes to Scorsese, particularly in the 2000s, you know, he loves that really aged color palette. And he's using very literal flashbacks to the concentration camps and the Nazi correlation here with the doctors that are in the asylum. And it just feels very ham-fisted and derivative, and I have to be honest, a bit of an eye roll. And I also struggled just a little bit with the casting. I think this is one of those films that, features a lot of really amazing character actors and famous actors, and it feels like each scene is really building to meet these characters in very specific ways, and sometimes that can be really fun. For example, I do think it works with actors like Jackie Earle Haley. I thought it built very well to his particular scene, and also the scene with Patricia Clarkson as example. But at other times, I do feel like the material would be better served if it was a little bit less self-conscious, as I've been saying, and maybe to surprise us. And I almost wish that maybe there were a few more unknown actors kind of peppered in there that would give us more of an eeriness. And this will come as no surprise to people who watch my channel, but I struggle the most with the casting of Leo DiCaprio as the protagonist. And, I've struggled with him a lot in the past, but one of the big reasons why, and I've said it so many times, but I think he's the type of performer that, when it comes to a very physical, very literal type of extroverted performance quality, I think he can do pretty well at that. It's just that I don't think he's cast in the right roles to showcase it. I revisited Once Upon a Time in Hollywood very recently, and I hadn't seen that since it came out, and I thought Leo was great in the film, and I feel like that's what he should be doing, is that type of comedy. That film, I think, perfectly taps into his style of performing, where he is both the butt of the joke, where they're very aware of that type of performance style, and yet it also enhances the humor really brilliantly. And I think when he tries to go more literal, and he's trying to take that type of performance style and go very dramatic and very serious, to me, it's more of an external technique, and it doesn't serve the material cerebrally. And this is a very cerebral type of film. I mentioned in my review for Infinity Pool recently, Mia Goth. I think she's a fantastic actress, but I do think she's one of those actresses where her talent it serves the cinema. It clicks when it's on screen. If she were to do that on stage, I don't think it would register nearly as well. And I kind of have the opposite issue with Leo DiCaprio. I think his style would actually overall work for theater better if he was going to go more dramatic and serious rather than cinematically. This is a very rough character to play, especially when you realize the truth of things. When the twist is revealed, you realize this person has a very, very heavy backstory. So they're carrying a lot. He is meant to, I think, embody a very gruff and stoic film noir type of archetype. And it is the cliche, where he's barely keeping himself together with whiskey and pills and cigarettes and etc. To me, I think it would have been far more interesting for this performance to be understated, and a lot of the performances around him maybe are a little bit more extroverted in that style. I just think he needs to be kind of numb to the present because he is holding so much darkness from the past. It just kind of makes sense. That way the slow reveal is more interesting as the tension is growing with the movie. And I just feel like, yeah, I don't know. There are so many great actors who master that type of slow burn who I think would be really great. Of course, naturally, I think about the old school actors that I would like to see in this part. I would love to see like a Dana Andrews in this movie, or even like a Humphrey Bogart. But Leo's charisma here, again, just feels very skin deep for me. It's all on the surface. The stress is always just very visible, and the anxiety, the fragility, and it all just feels very obvious for my taste, and it doesn't allow for a lot of nuance or a lot of questions. Leo is constantly trying to convince the audience that he's seen very dark things, and I think the key here is instead to be somebody who's trying to prove that he hasn't seen dark things to the audience. He's trying to hide a lot of his shame and his guilt. When everything feels like it's been emotionally paved for us already, which, sometimes is a problem with postmodern films, it ends up just kind of looking like a museum tour of the subconscious with like a lot of film excerpts melded together from your childhood. And I guess I don't really see the point of it. Not that it has to have a point, but this kind of movie, it's heavy material, and I would like for it to have a point. Just as a genre piece, whatever, it's fine, but, Scorsese tends to take genre pieces and transcend them, make something more of them, because that is very much his style. But it remains flat overall for me, and I want the characters to be explored way more here as well. That's the main thing that I want, I think, from the entire script. And I don't like the idea that everything is just hinging on the climax and the big twist at the end. And the twist is, it's what it is. It's one of those twists that is pretty easy to figure out, and I think a lot of people do. So the surprise element doesn't naturally work there. So I think what you need to emphasize is more the tragedy element of it. And to a degree, it is powerful, certainly. It is a devastating ending, and one of those where you do find yourself kind of haunted by it and contemplating it as the credits are rolling. But again, it is just too one note for my taste, and emotionally, thematically, with that particular climax, it's like we're putting all those eggs in one basket without the real payoff that I desire. I think Scorsese, when he's at his best, is able to mix the memory of cinema with the angst and the loneliness and the passion that is existing in the present. And I really want to love this because it's the first time in a long time that you're starting to see Scorsese tap into more psychological ideas, maybe cover a more intimate type of story, because up until this point, in the years prior, he had been doing a lot of big costume epics that didn't feel very personal to him, I will say. At least just that's my opinion. Movies like Gangs of New York or The Aviator, or a more ambitious ensemble like The Departed, which maybe is a little bit better than those films, but still, it's lacking something for me, and it always did. And here it's, no, the emotion is the key, and the internal emotion is the key to making the external emotion ignite, I think, in our minds. But again, it's all just shallow depths of exploration. Now, of course, there is a piece of me that loves genre pieces, and I love the aesthetic camp and the richness of the colors, as I said. And the story itself is very compelling. I do wish it were better written overall, but it's fairly solid. And I think if you go in maybe not expecting something really deep, if you're not expecting like a Taxi Driver, then, you know, you might have fun with it. I think it really does depend on your taste. Again, I really love these types of movies, so my standards tend to be quite high for them. I do respect, obviously, Scorsese and his breadth of knowledge when it comes to film, and it is always evident in his movies, but at a certain point, it feels like he's kind of going through the motions. And I have argued in the past that I think that Goodfellas is truly the last movie that really came from the soul, and it was the last movie that he made before the Academy and the accolades and such kind of took all of the innocence officially. Not saying he was innocent fully, but something changed about him, I think, after that point. And the movies became larger than him and more kind of important, maybe less personal overall. And like I said, this film, Shutter Island, really symbolizes a part of his career that I really struggle with post Goodfellas. And this is also an example, I think, of a great director who's maybe a little bit out of touch, and maybe he has too much money for his projects, because this does feel very overproduced and yet somehow simplistic at the same time, despite the psychological twists of it. I think you could have cut this budget in half and it would have been much more interesting, because they would have had to really push for things. They would have had to get a little bit creative, and they wouldn't be able to do as many literal dream sequences. So I think a lot of it would have to be inferred, and I think that could be maybe more interesting here, more down and dirty. And that's what I want to see, more soul from a director who, again, has become larger than life, and his name has become even bigger than the man. And I don't know about you, but I like to remember that directors are human, and I'm still, I think, longing for more of that in Scorsese's later career. But that is my review for Shutter Island. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'm going to plug my website as always. It is deepfocuslens.com. I'm an artist. I do commission portraits, and I also sell prints of my work. If that is something that you're interested in, you can always go to the website below. And if you have a question about a commission or a print, you can always email me. My email is in the description box below as well. Also, I'd like to give a shout out to my patrons, who are wonderful guys. Thank you so much for your support. If you're interested in supporting, the link for that is below, as well as the rest of my social media information. You can watch more videos here, and you can subscribe if you'd like. Catch you next time.